Okay, thanks. Thank you. God morning, everyone. My name is Deborah, and I am a most grateful member of this worldwide fellowship of Al-Anon and Alateen, and I am truly honored to stand before you. I say God morning because for many, many years, I woke up and I would say, oh God, it's morning. And I was told that I needed to flip that and start to say, good morning, God. And now I've kind of shortened it. It's just God morning, because it is a God morning. I want to thank the committee chair, co-chair, and all of you members. You have done an amazing, amazing job. And I can truly feel the theme of this year, Healing Our Hearts, has been accomplished. And so I honor all of you. I also greet you by saying namaste. When I say namaste, it means that I honor the place in you where your higher power lives. I honor the place in you which is of truth, of light, of peace, and of love. And when you are in that place in you, and I am in that place in me, then we are one. I feel that today, and I have always felt that when walking into the rooms of recovery. And I thank each and every one of you for that. It's coming into my mind now as I need to break into song, because you know how they tell you before you take a test, don't listen to music. Thank you, Wayne. Today I'm going to give you some pieces of my story, how I was affected by a disease called alcoholism. But more importantly, I want to share with you my strength and hope, because it is in there that we recover. Before I do begin, I want to give a shout out to my home group, which is the Sunday night Warehouse Point group. Start meeting at 6:30. And if you don't have a home group, you want to claim one. You want to find a place where you are going to feel safe and honored. This is a place where you will have the greatest growth and learn how to be one among many in a loving family. In my home group is where I really learned how to apply the traditions, along with service for many years. I was born into this disease called alcoholism. Both of my parents were not only affected by the disease themselves, but they also had the disease. I say today that I was the middle child. I was the monkey in the middle, and I played the role for many, many years. You know that telephone game. Could you tell your brother? Could you tell your sister? And I was always the one jumping around. I had 2 older siblings. One had passed before I was born, and 2 younger siblings. My parents were children having children and had no coping skills and knowledge of what it was to parent a child. My father's disease kept him from providing any physical, emotional, or financial support to the family. And I remember him coming in and out of my life a few times, but I really didn't know him. My mother was a rage-filled soul that really hated being here on the earth plane. And every day of my life that I was with her, I remember her crying and saying how she just wanted to die. I lived in a house that was devoid of love, support, and affection. Our physical needs of food, shelter, and clothing were barely met. And I learned at a very young age that I was not safe and that I could not count on anyone to be my voice in the world of adults. And because of this beginning, I've realized that I will always have been affected by a disease called alcoholism. And today, that's a blessing to me because it keeps me focused and conscious of how this disease has affected my life. I have choices today. I can live in my mind, the crazy monkey mind, or I can commune with the God of my understanding and live in peace. My earliest memory of how this disease affected me was at age 4. We lived with my grandparents. We lived on the first floor. My grandparents lived on the second and third floor. And my grandfather had a beautiful backyard. It was filled with lilac bushes. And behind the far back of the yard, there was a space that was just dirt. And I love dirt. And I can remember I was 4 years old, and I must have been dressed up. We must have been going somewhere, but I was allowed to go outside. And so, of course, I headed right for the dirt because I was going to dig to China. My father called me, and I came out from behind the lilac bushes, and he said, "What were you doing?" And I said, "I was playing in the dirt," which was a little muddy. And he saw how dirty I was. And the only thing I can remember that point as he was walking towards me, he was so angry. And I had a little friend I always played with, a magical friend. And I said to my friend, "Run, run, save yourself." And I remember my father grabbing me by the arm and starting to beat me until I went unconscious. About 10 years ago, I spoke at this convention in one of the workshop meetings. It was the power of recovery. And I remember sharing that memory because it had just come back to me. And as I was sharing it, I heard a whisper in my ear, "That was when you left God." And I didn't know at that time what that meant. Today I know that at age 4, I realized that I had to take care of myself and that I would not be able to count on anyone else to do that. This is when I started to play God. I also learned at age 4 how to leave my body when in extreme pain or danger, and that it's not safe to tell the truth, and that it doesn't matter what I do, it's going to be wrong. I took on the belief that I was a burden just by being here on the earth plane. Shortly after the incident, my mother took me and my siblings, and we left the house that I had lived in for the first 4 years of my life, and my beloved grandmother. I spent many hours with my grandmother. She and I had a bond that was so strong that to this day I can still feel that tug of wanting to be with her, even though she's left this earth plane many years ago. As you can expect and probably relate to in an alcoholic home, my life went from one insane asylum activity to the next. At age 10, I started to take on the roles of caretaker to my mother, protector to my siblings, housekeeper, laundry doer, runner of the house. I did everything I could to try to keep the peace and keep everyone, including me, safe. I didn't play, I worked. I learned that by age 10 that if I just work harder, things will be okay. And this followed me throughout my entire life with this disease. My motto was, "I'll make it fit and never give up." My belief that I was all-powerful continued to grow. My mother's disease progressed, and because of the insanity in the household, I felt that it was my role to be the protector to my younger siblings, my brother and sister. I became hyper-vigilant and slept with one eye open. My sense of smell became very acute because my mother smoked, and she would pass out, and her cigarettes would drop into the chair or couch she was on. And I needed to be aware if there was going to be fire to save us. Today I know that the word responsibility means to respond with ability. And since I didn't have any abilities to respond with, I just kept dancing. I learned that if I just kept moving, kept an eye on everyone else, if I could judge and rate who you were and what you were doing and where I was on that scale, that I would be safe. I would be able to protect myself and those around me. You can only imagine how much 4 through 9 step work this took to uncover, recover, and heal. On Sundays, my mother didn't work so she could drink all day. She'd pass out early in the afternoon and then wake up at about 2 or 3 in the morning. And I'm not sure what was going through her mind, but for her, she needed to get the house clean before she started work on Monday. And so she would come in and beat us until she could get us all moving to start to clean the house. And during these cleaning sessions, my mother would pull out the vacuum cleaner. Now, she would still be drunk and rip-roaring mad, and she'd be vacuuming. So what do you think I learned? I learned that when you have to vacuum, you get really, really angry. I can't tell you how many years when I pulled out the vacuum cleaner, within a minute or two, I'd be in a rage. I'd just be completely out of my head. And after I came into recovery, one day, through the grace of God, I had a consciousness, I had a spiritual awakening, and I saw my behavior, and I started laughing. I realized that you can vacuum the house without getting so upset. Not that I like to vacuum even to this day, but it's not so traumatic anymore. By the time I was 15, there was so much insanity in the house that I didn't want to live anymore. I used to practice how they'd find me when I died. I'd lay in bed, I'd have my arms folded over me, peaceful expression on my face, the rosary beads in my hands. And I realized right then and there that my spirit was dying, and it would be many, many years before I had a spiritual awakening. In actuality, I didn't want to die. I just wanted something to change. I'd thrown out all the liquor, but that didn't change anything. I kept my mother every single night and put her to bed and kiss her and tell her I loved her. But that didn't change anything. Things were only getting worse. I had learned early on that adults are no help, and they won't keep me safe. But I did have a godmother, and today I call her Mother of God. And I reached out to her. I wrote her a note to tell her what was going on in the family. And she responded almost immediately and said, "You're coming to live with us." So at age 15, I left my home. And I moved to another state to live with my godmother and my uncle, my 3 boy cousins, and my beloved grandmother. We were reunited. We actually shared a bedroom for the two plus years that I lived there. And that was an amazing, amazing experience. There's a whole bunch more story here. I mean, there was a lot that went on in just those couple of years. You can only imagine my aunt and uncle were also affected by this disease. There was just a lot of, it looked good insanity because they lived in a really beautiful community and they had a beautiful home and they kept me dressed immaculately. And so on the outside, we looked really, really wonderful. But on the inside, I was disintegrating, slowly but surely. What I learned when I lived with them was I learned to work harder than ever before. I learned not to ever tell anyone what was going on in the house because I was being physically and sexually abused. I learned that I was a burden by being there, and I stopped eating. And for years, I would go, "Oh, you're so thin." And I'm like, I wouldn't eat their food. I didn't want to be a burden to them. And I was told this by my aunt, my godmother, directly in every single day. I would walk out of the house and she'd say, "You're representing your uncle and I. Don't shame us." So I learned to keep my mouth shut and don't tell no matter what. And I learned again how to lie. This disease took my mother's life when I was 19 years old. She was 44. And a few years later, lung cancer exacerbated by alcoholism took my father's life. He was 50. My spirit was almost dead by this point, and I had started to become very hardened to life. I would not allow myself to feel. I just kept doing. I used to pull the skin off my fingers, and they would just bleed and bleed, but I did it just to see, can I feel any pain? And I did that up until about 12, 15 years ago. I would continue to peel the skin off my fingers. I would bite my nails until they were at the quick, and they would get infected. But I felt no pain. I felt no physical pain. I was getting completely numb. And little by little, my life force energy was leaving me. And my mind kept telling me that I deserved everything that was happening to me. I got married for the first time at age 20 to my high school sweetheart. This man told me he loved me, and I had never heard those words before. And I know it may sound strange, but I have never once heard from my mother or father that they loved me. They never once held me, and they never once comforted me. And so when someone came into my life and told me they loved me, I thought they loved me. I didn't know what it was, but I was willing to go for the ride. But my husband's words were followed up with physical and emotional abuse. He controlled my every move. He threatened my life every day. And to prove his point at night, he would take a loaded gun, click the lever, hold it to my head, and say, "Sweet dreams." During this marriage, I lost 2 children because of the abuse. And my husband convinced me that I would never be a good mother and that I should have my tubes tied, which I did. I would do anything to be loved. I would take my body and twist it inside out just for you to love me. I tried a number of times to escape from this abusive marriage unsuccessfully, but one day I made it. I flew to California. I had $20 in my pocket and a friend who said I could sleep on their living room floor, which I did for many, many months. But because I had learned to work at such a young age, I was able to pull my life together and get a job. But most of my life was miserable. I was what I called myself a functional depressive. While in California the first year, I moved 14 times, and most of the time didn't know if I was coming or going. I divorced my first husband over the phone and was feeling like the most unloved, uncared for person in the world. And it never, ever dawned on me that I could care for me. So I met a man who thought I was really nice and who wanted to marry me. He was really gentle and caring and loving. And even though he drank a little too much, he wasn't physically abusive. He didn't hit me. I didn't know that alcoholics came in more than one size, shape, or color. I just didn't realize that. I was in my late 20s by this point, and I had opened a business in California, and though I really wasn't making enough money to live on, I really loved what I was doing. And I would supplement my income by waitressing at night and by doing bookkeeping for a few local restaurants, and then working 10 to 12 hours a day at my business. My childhood taught me how to be a really good worker. But during this time, I wanted to expand my business. And so I went to this seminar, this motivational speaker. And at the end of it, he handed out these $100 laminated bills and said, "Always carry this with you. It's going to make you feel prosperous." And at the end of the seminar, he said, "I'm giving you all an assignment. Every day, you need to stand in front of the mirror naked and look at yourself and say, 'I am good and I deserve the best.'" I thought, okay, this should be interesting. I didn't have mirrors in my house because I couldn't look at myself. And so I got a mirror. And for 3 months, I would peek around the corner. I'd peek around. I'd kind of look at myself in my eyes. I would try to say something to myself and was having a really hard time. And after 3 months, I was just persistent. I was not going to give in to this. And after 3 months, I went in and I looked at myself. I was naked. I'm standing in front of the mirror and I'm like, "Deborah, you are good and you deserve the best." And I turned around and I looked at my husband and said, "I'm leaving." Thank you, God. I was starting to become conscious of the effects of my childhood disease. But after almost 5 years of running that business, working 7 days a week, I was physically and mentally exhausted. My brother and sister had followed me. We were a trio. We went everywhere together. I'd move from the East Coast to the West Coast, they'd come. I'd move from the West Coast to the East Coast, they'd follow me along. And we were living together a lot throughout our lives. And my job was always to make sure that they were safe and taken care of. But during this time, my younger sister had a full mental breakdown and couldn't even eat by herself. And my brother's dis-ease of alcoholism was running rampant through his life. But what did I learn during this time? I learned that I can control the world if everyone would just obey me. I learned that I have to do it all or it doesn't get done. I learned that my own needs aren't important. Just make sure everyone else is happy, and then I'll feel safe. But during this time, my older sister would call me every Sunday, and she would tell me about this cult she had gotten into called Al-Anon. She would tell me about all the wonderful things she was learning and how she was happy and that I didn't have to live like this. And I was like, what are you smoking now in that place? I'm like, oh God, I would hang up the phone, I'd turn around and I'd tell my brother and sister, she's gone nuts this time, she's really off the deep end. And we would laugh and laugh and laugh. And she did this for a couple of years, every Sunday. In October of 1984, I lost my business. I was 32 years old. I lost my business. My 12-year-old dog had disappeared, and my 64.5 Mustang was repossessed by the bank. That one really hurt. That really hurt. And that all happened within 2 months. I had hit my bottom. I was given the gift of desperation. I remember I was sitting in a rocking chair, and I had a razor blade in one hand and the phone in the other. Because at age 32, life was just too hard to live. I had done it all. I had done everything that I had inside of me, but I just couldn't seem to make this work. So I called my sister. You know that one that was in the cult in Al-Anon? You never know the seeds that you're planting when you're carrying the message. And I thank God every day that I called her. She quickly gave me an 800 number. I honestly think she had it tattooed on her arm because it was so handy. And I called that number. And within an hour, someone came to my house, picked me up, took me to their home, let me cry, fed me, and took me to my first Al-Anon meeting. I don't know the date I came in. I was in such shock, but I know it was October of 1984. And I say that every time because I don't even remember this woman's name, but I remember how gentle and loving and caring she was. We used to always talk about the answering service in Al-Anon, and for many, many years my name was on that list as service back to someone who came for me. Of course, going to that one meeting didn't change my life, but it did give me some hope. And today I know that hope means hang on, peace exists. I was still very outward focused. I still didn't know that I existed. But I know that when I walked into that room of Al-Anon, even though I wasn't dead, there was no life left in me. I was a shell of a human being. And I started to go to meetings in California, but they were bringing up so much pain, and I just didn't know what to do with it. And I was just in so much shock from the amount of physical, emotional, and spiritual abuse I had experienced up to that point. I walked around with my arms crossed in front of me, and so my head would be down, my arms would be crossed, and I was not very approachable. I didn't want you to touch me because I couldn't trust that I wouldn't be hurt. In June of '85, I drove across the country back to the East Coast with my boyfriend. We got married later that year. Yes, hope springs eternal. He's a very gentle, quiet soul who, from what I've observed, has a lot of difficulty being in this world, and he self-medicates with alcohol. I found a home group in Simsbury at St. Albans Church, and those wonderful, loving souls helped me to start to see that I was worthy. You know how they did that? Help set up the chairs. Take a coffee commitment. Take a meeting. Sponsor. Yes, you can speak. And that beautiful soul helped me as she was walking her own 12-step journey. I went to meetings 7 days a week for many, many years. And during that time, there would be a pile of us in the car. So like every meeting was 3 meetings. You had the meeting on the way to the meeting, then you had the meeting, and then the meeting on the way home. It was an amazing experience and one I will never, ever, ever forget. During this time, I learned that I didn't cause alcoholism. I couldn't control it, and I couldn't cure it. But this particular sponsor helped me with something that was the most important thing I've learned, the 3 G's. Get off his back, give them to God, and get on with your life. Those were so scary to me because I really didn't know what it meant to get on with my life. Up to that point, I hadn't lived my life. I had lived everyone else's life. A few years later, we moved to Enfield in '88, and with a lot of support from my previous home group and my sponsor, I got settled in that area. I found another sponsor who was a dual member, and she taught me more about this disease called alcoholism. And for many, many years, I went to open AA meetings. I then got another sponsor, because you can't have too many sponsors, right? She taught me about prayer and meditation, and how to drop from my head to my heart. And for so many years, I beat myself up because in my marriage, Al-Anon says you can be happy whether the alcoholic is still drinking or not. But I was in a marriage with an active alcoholic, and I wasn't happy. I was being triggered nonstop. And one night, sharing with a beautiful angel in these rooms, I asked him, what am I doing wrong? Why can't I get this? What's going on? And she just smiled at me and said, maybe you're just tired of living with alcoholism. She gave me permission to be happy, something I could not give to myself. So I always say, thank you, God, for doing for me what I could not do for myself. So 7.5 years ago, after a lot of prayer, meditation, and searing, gut-wrenching, pull the skin off your body pain, I finally surrendered to God's will for me, and that was for me to leave my marriage. Surrender. Following the invisible into the unknown. Thank God I had learned how to take the first 3 steps, and I had a God of an understanding that I knew loved and cared for me. Because little did I know that my job of 24 years would end 2 weeks later. So I buckled my seatbelt because the ride gets a little bumpy, and I got ready for the best ride of my life. And thank you, God, by this point, I had been practicing the 12 steps for years. But once I removed myself from this active disease, it felt like all the work that I had been doing up to that point, it catapulted me into another dimension. I know today that learning how to recover from the effects of a disease called alcoholism can only be done by adopting a spiritual program. So what are these spiritual principles that we can use? Well, thank God that they are laid out in the 12 steps, and that once I'm walking on these steps, I have the traditions that teach me how to live in the world and the concepts. In step 1, when I admit that I am power-less, over alcohol, and that my life is unmanageable, it doesn't mean that I was weak. What this step means to me is that until I admit I'm powerless, that I don't have a higher power in my life, and that usually means that I'm playing God instead of being the godlike being that I am. My life is always unmanageable when left to my own devices. I put those words over alcohol in commas because for me, what's in between those commas is every person, place, or thing in my life. I remember that of myself I can do nothing, but God can and will if sought. As soon as I realize I am powerless, it's important for me to come back to center because I don't know about you, but my life can become unmanageable very quickly. And I use my body as my source of staying in contact with my God. So if there's any constriction or restriction in my body, God is trying to say, something's going on, pay attention. I know that at that point that I am playing a role. I've got a mask on and I'm not being who I am. It's important for me to remember that I will always have been affected by alcoholism because when I forget, it's very easy for this disease to take over my life. My disease is always in the parking lot doing push-ups, and so working step 1 on a daily, minute-by-minute basis, I have a chance of health and well-being. In step 2, I came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. I learned to move beyond hope and live in faith. Living beyond hope, for me, is to realize my dreams. It's to claim that which I want to experience with the confidence that I will have it. I never learned how to dream. I lived minute by minute to survive. But I know today, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that my thoughts and words are being fulfilled by a power greater than me. 3.5 years ago, my youngest sister died. When she died, I went insane. Because I grew up in a war zone, it felt like soldier down. One of us was dead. Everything in my body and mind was on high alert. All of the smoke alarms were going off, and I became terrified that my brother or my other sister would die. It brought me out of myself, my higher self, and I became a crazed person who had taken on the role of God. This went on before I was brought to my knees once again, and remembering that step 2 gave me that faith that I can heal my heart when I walk my grief through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I can't even begin that journey without taking step 2. In step 3, I turned my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood God. In the beginning, I would give anyone my life. I had no value or worth for it. But my will? That's another thing altogether. I knew that without taking this step, I had no chance of recovering from the effects of this disease. So I took the step because I knew my life was unmanageable. I knew that I couldn't do it on my own, and I was willing to give a higher power a chance. Now, my higher power has changed a lot over the years. In the beginning, I used the group as my higher power because my childhood God was tied to a religion that I couldn't accept as my own anymore. I needed a spiritual God. I needed one that didn't have any associations with my history. Today, I know that there is only one presence and power active in the universe and in my life, God, the good omnipotent. I know that God is everywhere and in everything. And so I have been able to blend some of my childhood religious prayers and rituals into my daily life. And for that, I am grateful. Step 4, I made a searching and fearless moral inventory myself. Wow. This was quite a task, and I am so grateful that I am honest, open, and willing, because that's how it works, to walk through my history so that I can keep what works for me and discard what doesn't. In step 4, I learned that I am not a mistake. I don't have to try to earn love or to be or do anything to stay safe. I am love. I am a child of this universal spirit I call God, and just being that alone is enough. I used to think that every mistake I made just reinforced that I was a mistake. Today, I don't make mistakes. I create experiences to learn from. Not always happy about that, but it is what it is. Today, I can say that I am love, and I am saying it to all of you. So are you. And if you take away nothing else today, remember that you are love and that you don't have to do anything else to be love. I have a bumper sticker on my truck that says, "Life is the school, love is the lesson." Love is how we heal our hearts. I love the story of Michelangelo when he was creating the statue David. Michelangelo had this 40-foot slab of marble, and he carved a most magnificent statue out of it. And when he was asked, "How did you ever see David was always there?" Marble. I just removed everything that wasn't David. That's what step 4 does for me. In the beginning, first couple times I took this step, I was a little hard on myself. And I was reminded by a loving sponsor that I am not chopping down a forest. I'm cultivating a garden. So easy does it. Honesty, openness, and willingness is all that is required. In step 5, I admit to myself, to God, and to another human being the exact nature of my wrongs. And I read a poem that sums this one up in its entirety, and it goes like this. To listen another's soul into a condition of discovery and disclosure is the greatest service that any human being can do for another. When I walk this step, that is exactly what I am doing with myself, with the God of my understanding, and with another human being. And that's what they are doing with me. And if you think about it, it's what we do in every meeting. We are listening our souls into a condition of discovery and disclosure. We create the space and grace for healing. Step 6. I love this step. Become entirely ready to have God remove my defects of character. This is where you put your seatbelt on, because the ride is going to get bumpy. Because when I become entirely ready, the floodgates of love open from my higher power. I get so many opportunities in front of me to choose another path. The word remove doesn't mean that my defects are going to be removed from me. It's not like they're fleas. You can't just pick them off. But it means that everything that is keeping me from being in union and communion with God will be removed. The word remove means put it at a distance. And my higher power helps me use this step to help me get some distance between my head and my heart. This was a critical step for me to learn how to do that. In this step, I can clearly see where my actions and behaviors are hurting myself and others. This is a big thank you, God step, because if I can't see it, I can't heal it. I don't waste my pain anymore. I focus on the birth instead of the death, because there's always a blessing, a divine shift. Step 7 is a cleansing step for me. In step 4, I learn more about who I am, what I want to build upon, and what I need to surrender to God. I right-size this along with my sponsor and God in step 5. And in 6, I get a clearer picture of what is still keeping me from my higher self, so that by the time that I reach step 7, I'm feeling a little lighter. I'm a little cleansed. I've raised my consciousness to more closely align with the God of my understanding. This step helps me prepare for the next step on this journey home to my higher self. I'm grateful for what I've learned and been blessed to receive. In step 8, make a list of all persons we had harmed and become willing to make amends to them all. I could make the list very quickly. Every person I ever saw, touched, or talked to was on my list. I needed a little help with that one. But becoming willing, there's that will, I heard a speaker talk last night about righteous indignation. That was like, that was my favorite fear-based act. Righteous, and I know I'm right. This is where I start to see where the disease has worked through me and affected others. Remember that aunt that I went to live with when I was 15? Well, for many years, she and I had a very contentious relationship. I was angry for her for what I had experienced when living with her, not because I experienced it, but because she admitted that she knew what was going on and didn't do anything to stop it. And for over 20 years, I would not put her name on that list because I was right. I didn't even call her by her name. I had a really derogatory name I gave her. And so most of the people, when they heard about my aunt, they didn't know her name. About 10 years ago, I started to ask God to help me to become willing. It took another couple of years, and I finally put her name on the list. I was willing. I wasn't looking forward to making amends, but at least I was willing. Well, 7 years ago, I found out she was being abused by her new husband and she needed to be saved. Literally, she was in her early 80s. And so my cousin and I went down to the south and brought her back up north. And for the past 7 years, I would visit with her, and her mind was slowly disappearing. And I say that she was actually moving more into her soul than her mind. She was dropping from her head to her heart. And about 2 years ago, her mind was almost completely gone. And she and I had had the most incredible healing that could ever take place. I got to experience and see the beauty of this wonderful soul. All of the anger was gone, and there was only love. She passed away about a month ago. And I went down on my knees and thanked God for the grace and blessing of this relationship. We both experienced a healing, and she transitioned from the world in peace. And I was able to start to see through love-filled eyes instead of anger and righteous indignation. I did a living amends by being there when she needed me and loving her through the last few years of her life, a gift that I could never have imagined occurring. And every time I left her, I would bend over and I would say, "I love you, Auntie." And she'd look at me and say, "I love you more." But because of taking steps 8 and 9, I was able to grieve for this soul. I believe that if I hadn't done these steps, my grief would have stayed locked up in anger and resentments. And eventually those toxic energies would have taken their toll on my body. I am still living in the gratitude and grace of these 2 steps, as their meaning has become even deeper for me over the past year. Step 10, continue to take personal inventory, and when I was wrong, promptly admitted it. I love this step. This is my pick it up, put it in the bag, boom, boom. That was a cartoon in the mid-50s about picking up litter. And they sang this song, how you pick it up, you put it in the bag, and then you do a little boom, boom. I think of this when I do step 10, because if I don't pick up the litter every day, then I'm living in a dump and it stinks. It's important for me to stay conscious of who I am, that I don't let anything get in the way of me and my higher powers relationship. For so many years, I would go to bed and not sleep. My mind would be twirling with all of the anger and resentments that I had picked up that day. I had heard a speaker one time telling the story of his friend saying to him, "If you were driving down the street in a convertible and somebody came and took a big barrel of trash and dumped it in your convertible, what would you do?" He said, "Well, after getting really angry, I'd probably clean out the car." And the friend said, "Then why, when somebody dumps their trash on you, do you close the windows and put the heat on?" If I don't take step 10 every single day, every single minute of the day, my mind will wedge between me and my higher power. I'm closing the windows, and I'm driving around in all of that stink. Step 11 is a step that I could do an entire workshop on. It's my favorite, one of my favorite steps. And it's a step that I use to quiet down the monkey mind and commune with God. I know today that it's my thoughts that are so deadly to my recovery. So without my daily prayer and meditation practice, I would be my experiences, not just have them. I would be God instead of a godlike being. I only ask for God's will for me and the power to carry that out on everything. I'm a baby. I'm still a baby. This is the step that keeps me from spreading the effects of this disease on everyone and everything around me. My meditation practice is very sacred to me. And I have something pinned on my computer screen because it takes a lot. I have to practice all things every day, every minute, and I have things pinned all over my house. And I read it regularly, and I want to share it with you. Sitting in silence is our strongest connection with God. We carry no words in. We do not listen for words coming from the power of God. Adrift in the silence, one with God, filling our heart with God. We return from the silence transformed, and in that transformation, our lives are richly blessed. Who wouldn't want that? In step 12, I am learning how to be the change I wish to see in the world. I didn't just go through it, I grew through it. There's a quote that sums up this step for me, and it says, "Live in such a way that those who know you but don't know God will come to know God because they know you." I've learned that by practicing these spiritual principles in all my affairs, that I am taking a journey without any expectation of the destination. It's the journey home to my higher self. This helps me to live my life as an expression of joy rather than being in pursuit of my happiness. One of the greatest blessings I have received in Al-Anon is to learn that life isn't happening to me, it's happening for me, and it's all a blessing. I've also learned that by walking these steps and traditions for many years, that God takes my mess and has turned it into my message. And I honor and thank each of you for being so gracious with your time and listening. God bless you.